By the time the casseroles stopped coming, everyone assumed I was fine. That's how it usually works. There's a brief window where grief is expected, where people check in, lower their voices, ask the same careful questions. Then time passes, the ritual ends, and the absence becomes your responsibility to manage quietly. My sister had been gone for 3 months. Official cause of death, an accident. Details, minimal. Investigation, brief. That was the word everyone kept using. Brief. As if the length of it said something reassuring. As if efficiency was the same thing as certainty. I lived alone in a small apartment on the edge of town. Nothing special. 2nd floor, 1 bedroom, thin walls. The kind of place you choose because it's close to work and cheap enough that you don't think about it much. I went back to work 2 weeks after the funeral. No one argued with me about it. My manager said something about routine being healthy. I nodded and let the days fill themselves in again. Wake up, shower, coffee, traffic, emails, meetings, dinner from a microwave, sleep. It helped in a way. Routine gave the days edges again. Without it, everything blurred together. I needed the structure to keep from replaying the same thoughts over and over. What I didn't need was to talk about her. People asked anyway, mostly out of obligation, mostly in passing. How are you holding up? Must be hard. Let me know if you need anything. I learned quickly which answers ended the conversation fastest. I'm okay. Taking it day by day. It was just an accident. That last one always worked. It closed things neatly. No follow-up questions. No uncomfortable pauses. Accidents happen. Everyone understands that. My sister had been younger than me by 5 years. Close enough that we'd grown up overlapping. Shared friends, shared jokes, shared long stretches of silence where neither of us felt the need to fill the space. We hadn't lived near each other as adults, but we talked often. Texts mostly. Short calls. The kind of contact that feels constant without being intrusive. The night she died, I missed a call from her. That detail never made it into the official narrative. I didn't tell anyone about it. The call had come late, long after I'd gone to bed. I'd seen the missed notification the next morning and assumed she'd dialed by mistake or pocket. Called me. By the time I realized she was gone, the missed call felt irrelevant. A coincidence stacked on top of 100 others. That's what I told myself anyway. The police had been polite, professional. They asked their questions, took notes, thanked me for my time. They didn't linger. They didn't dig. There was nothing to dig into, they said. Everything pointed to an accident. I signed paperwork. I boxed up her things when they were released. I handed over what was needed and kept what I could carry. Then I went home and put the boxes in the closet. I didn't open them. Some nights were harder than others, not in the dramatic way people expect. No breakdowns, no sobbing fits. Just a quiet, hollow feeling that sat behind everything else. Like the volume on the world had been turned down slightly. I slept with the TV on for a while, just to have something in the background. Eventually, even that felt unnecessary. Silence became normal. That night started like any other. I'd worked late, stayed later than I needed to just to avoid going home to an empty apartment too early. When I finally did leave, the parking lot was nearly empty. The sky was clear, the air cool enough to make walking feel deliberate. Dinner was forgettable. I don't remember what it was, only that it came in a plastic tray and required exactly 4 minutes in the microwave. Afterward, I washed the fork, dried it, and put it back in the drawer. I checked my phone without thinking, thumb moving out of habit more than curiosity. No new messages. I set the phone face down on the coffee table and sat back on the couch. The apartment was quiet in a way I'd grown used to. Not uncomfortable. Just still. The hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen, the occasional car passing outside. I told myself this was what moving on felt like. At some point I closed my eyes. I didn't fall asleep. I was aware of the room the whole time, the couch beneath me, the dim light from the lamp in the corner. My mind drifted without settling anywhere in particular. Then, My phone buzzed. The sound was sharp in the quiet room, loud enough to make me flinch. I opened my eyes and stared at the ceiling for a moment, annoyed at myself for reacting so strongly. I reached forward and picked up the phone, expecting a spam notification or an automated reminder. The screen lit up. New voicemail. I frowned. I hadn't spoken to anyone that night. I rarely got voicemails at all anymore. Most people texted. Anyone who didn't usually hung up before leaving a message. I tapped the notification. The voicemail app opened slowly, buffering for a second longer than usual. One new message sat at the top of the list, marked as unheard. The timestamp showed it had been left just moments ago. What caught my attention wasn't the time. It was the number. I stared at it longer than I should have. It was her number, my sister's. The same one I still had saved in my contacts. The same one I hadn't deleted, even after everything else had been handled. The same one that had been disconnected weeks earlier, according to the carrier. My first thought was that it had to be a glitch. Old data resurfacing. Delayed transmission. Some error in the system pulling up a message that had never properly synced. That kind of thing happens, I told myself. Phones are unreliable. Networks fail. I almost closed the app. Instead, I held the phone a little tighter. The message length was short. Under 10 seconds. I sat up straight, suddenly aware of how quiet the apartment had become. The hum of the refrigerator seemed louder now, closer. I hovered my thumb over the play button. This is nothing, I thought. This is just a mistake. I pressed play. For a fraction of a second, there was only silence. Then I heard her breathe. The recording was clean. No static, no distortion. Just the faint, familiar sound of her breathing, close to the phone's microphone, as if she'd been holding it near her mouth without quite committing to speaking yet. I froze. For a split second, my brain did something strange. It accepted the sound without question. Like muscle memory. Like hearing a voice you've known your whole life and not needing to identify it. Then the reality of it caught up. Her voice came through the speaker, low and steady. Hey. Just that. No greeting, no name. The way she used to start calls when she didn't want to waste time. My thumb slipped, almost dropping the phone. I caught it, heart pounding now, the room suddenly too small. She sounded tired, not panicked, not scared, just focused. I don't have a lot of time. I stood up without realizing it, pacing a few steps across the living room. The words felt wrong in my ears, not because of what she was saying, but because she was saying anything at all. This can't be new, I thought. This has to be old, delayed voicemail, corrupted data, something sent weeks ago and only just delivered now. That explanation made sense. It had to. Her voice continued. If you're listening to this, please, just believe me. She paused, inhaled softly through her nose. It wasn't an accident. The words landed with a dull, heavy finality. No emphasis, no tremor. She didn't raise her voice or rush the sentence. She stated it the way someone states a fact they've already accepted. The message ended there. No goodbye, no explanation. Just a soft click, like the phone being lowered or a button being pressed too firmly. The app returned to silence. I stood there, staring at the screen, waiting for something else to happen. Another message. An error notification. Anything that would explain what I'd just heard. Nothing came. I played it again. The second time, I listened harder, as if volume and attention alone could turn the message into something harmless. I leaned closer to the speaker, straining to catch imperfections, glitches, looping artifacts, signs that this was some kind of automated reconstruction. There were none. Her voice was exactly as I remembered it. The slight dryness when she was tired, the way she clipped the end of certain words. Even the brief pause before the last sentence, like she was choosing how much to say. I checked the timestamp again. Tonight, minutes ago. That's impossible, I said out loud. The sound of my own voice startled me. It felt intrusive in the quiet apartment. I hit the call button. The phone rang once, then twice. Then the line went dead. Not voicemail, not a recorded message, just silence. I tried again. This time, the phone didn't even ring. It immediately displayed a brief error message before returning me to the home screen. Call cannot be completed. I opened my contacts and stared at her name. The photo was still there. The one I'd never changed, taken years ago when she'd laughed at me for choosing it. Disconnected, the carrier had said. Number no longer active. I sat back down slowly, phone still in my hand, my thoughts racing ahead of themselves. Okay, I thought. Okay. There's an explanation for this. I ran through the possibilities methodically, the way I did when panic threatened to take over. Old voicemail stuck in a server queue. Data migration error. The phone pulling cached information from a backup. Maybe the message had been left before she died and never delivered properly. Maybe I'd missed it then, and it had surfaced now because of some update or sync issue. That made sense. It had to be something like that. I checked the message details, navigating through menus I rarely touched. The file size was small but intact. No indication of corruption. No warning labels. I looked for the option to see when the voicemail had been recorded. There wasn't one. I played it a third time. This time I noticed how controlled she sounded. How careful. There was no background noise. No traffic. No television. No obvious indication of where she was calling from. Just her voice. Close. Intentional. That bothered me more than the words themselves. If she'd left this by accident, if it had been a misdial or a rushed call, there would have been something else. A distraction. A stumble. Some sign that the message wasn't planned. This felt planned. I shook my head and locked the phone, setting it face down on the coffee table like it might burn me if I kept holding it. You're overthinking this, I said to the empty room. That's all this is. Grief does things to your brain. I'd read that somewhere. It makes patterns where there aren't any. Pulls meaning from coincidences. Keeps you stuck on what-ifs. I stood up and went into the kitchen, poured myself a glass of water, and drank it too quickly. The cold helped, grounding me in something physical. When I came back, the phone was still there. I picked it up again against my better judgment and tried the number one last time. Same result. No ring, no connection. I considered calling the carrier, then dismissed the idea just as quickly. What would I even say? That I'd received a voicemail from a dead person? That the timestamp didn't make sense? There was no version of that conversation that ended with anything other than polite confusion. I sat back down and stared at the dark television screen, my reflection faintly visible in it. I looked tired, older than I felt a moment ago. It's just a glitch, I said quietly. Saying it out loud didn't help as much as I'd hoped. I told myself I'd deal with it in the morning, that things would look different in daylight, that whatever system error had caused this would resolve itself, the way these things usually did. I left the phone on the table and went to bed without turning off the lights. Sleep didn't come easily. Every time I closed my eyes, I heard her voice again, not replaying the message, just the first word. Hey. Calm, familiar, and very much not supposed to exist. I didn't sleep. Not really. I drifted in and out of something light and shallow, my mind circling the same few thoughts until they lost any sense of order. By morning, I felt wrung out and dull, like I'd already lived through an entire day before it even started. The voicemail was still there. That was the first thing I checked when my alarm went off. I reached for my phone without thinking, half expecting the notification to be gone, replaced by some error message that would explain everything away. It hadn't changed. Same timestamp, same number, same short duration. I played it once more, standing in the kitchen while the coffee brewed. Her voice sounded exactly the same in the daylight. That made it worse. I called my mobile provider as soon as they opened. The woman on the line was polite and efficient. She asked for my account information, confirmed my identity, then put me on hold while she checked the details. Yes, she said when she came back. That number has been deactivated. How long ago? I asked. Just over 2 months, she replied. Shortly after the account holder passed away. And there's no way a new voicemail could come from it? I asked, already knowing the answer. No, she said without hesitation. Once a number is disconnected, it can't send or receive calls or messages. Any voicemails left before deactivation would have been delivered immediately or stored on our servers for a limited time, not months later. Could there have been a delay? I pressed. Some kind of backlog? She paused, just long enough for me to hear her thinking. No, she said. I'm sorry. That wouldn't be possible. I thanked her and hung up, my hand shaking slightly as I set the phone down. Okay, I thought. So it's not a network issue. That left data. I pulled my old laptop out from under the bed, the one I'd used before switching to my current one. It still had backups from years ago, including copies of conversations with my sister. I plugged it in and waited for it to boot, the fan whining louder than I remembered. I searched her name. Dozens of chat threads came up. Text messages, short video clips, photos we'd sent back and forth. I clicked into one at random and scrolled. The conversation stopped abruptly, not at the point she died, not even close. It ended weeks earlier, in the middle of a casual exchange. No goodbye, no explanation, just silence. I opened another thread. Same thing, another. Again, the conversation cut off mid-sentence. I sat back, my pulse picking up. I knew for a fact we'd talked after those dates. I remembered specific conversations, jokes we'd shared, plans we'd half made and never followed through on. They were gone. I checked my phone next, scrolling through our message history there. The same pattern repeated itself. Threads that should have stretched up until the day she died now ended early, as if someone had drawn a line through them and erased everything beyond it. I checked timestamps, file properties, metadata. Some files were corrupted, others refused to open at all. This wasn't random data loss. It was selective. I opened her email archive next, using the login information I'd been given when handling her affairs. Most of it was intact. Newsletters, receipts, work correspondence. But entire chains were missing. Emails that should have existed simply didn't. Gaps where replies should have been. Subject lines without bodies, as if the contents had been removed and the shell left behind. I closed the laptop and sat there staring at the blank screen. Someone had done this. Not automatically. Not accidentally. Deliberately. I thought back to the days after her death, to the way things had moved quickly. Too quickly. How her phone had been taken as part of the investigation and returned later, wiped and reset. At the time, I'd assumed that was standard procedure. Now, I wasn't so sure. I remembered the officer who'd handed the phone back to me, apologizing for the inconvenience. I remembered the way he'd avoided my eyes when I asked if they'd found anything unusual. Nothing that points to foul play, he'd said. I'd accepted that answer because I'd needed to. Another memory surfaced, uninvited. The hospital room. The paperwork. The way the nurse had hesitated before confirming the time of death, as if checking something in her head before speaking. Small things. Easy to dismiss when you're overwhelmed by loss. Harder to ignore now. I played the voicemail again, listening not just to her words, but to what surrounded them. There was still no obvious background noise, but the silence itself felt intentional, like she'd been careful about where and when she recorded it. If she'd known something was wrong, if she'd suspected she was in danger, this message would make sense. Not as a plea for help, as a warning. I leaned back in my chair and closed my eyes. The official story suddenly felt thin. Not wrong exactly, but incomplete in a way that made it unreliable. A version of events smoothed down until it no longer snagged on uncomfortable details. I opened my eyes again, the room feeling different now, less safe, more exposed. This wasn't grief playing tricks on me. There were gaps here, missing pieces that didn't fit the narrative I'd been given. And for the first time since the funeral, I allowed myself to consider the thought I'd been pushing away since the voicemail arrived. What if it really hadn't been an accident? I must have listened to the voicemail 20 times before I noticed anything new. At first, I'd only been replaying it out of disbelief, like repetition alone might dull the impact or turn it into background noise. But the more I listened, the harder it became to ignore the feeling that there was more there than I'd heard the first few times. I stopped listening for the words. I started listening for everything else. I sat at the kitchen table with my phone connected to a pair of wired headphones, the kind that block out just enough sound to make the world feel distant. I closed the blinds, not because anyone was watching, but because I didn't want to see movement while I concentrated. I pressed play. Her breathing came first. Soft, controlled, too controlled. Not the absent-minded breathing of someone distracted or nervous, but the kind you hear when someone is actively trying not to be noticed. I rewound it and listened again. There was a pause before she spoke. Just under 2 seconds, long enough for someone to listen to something outside the frame of the recording. Then her voice. "Hey." Nothing in her tone suggested panic. That was the part that bothered me most. If she'd been afraid, it would have been easier to dismiss the message as an emotional reaction, something recorded in the heat of the moment. But she sounded measured, prepared. I focused on the silence behind her words. It wasn't empty. There was a faint, almost imperceptible sound beneath everything else. A low, steady hum. Not electronic. Not white noise. Something mechanical, distant enough to be part of the environment rather than the recording itself. I frowned and rewound the message again, this time boosting the volume far past what was comfortable. The hum became clearer. Ventilation. Air moving through a system under mild pressure. I paused the recording and sat there, heart beating a little faster. I ran through places she might have been when she recorded it. Her apartment, her car, her workplace. None of them fit. Her apartment had always been noisy. Traffic outside, neighbors, the old radiator that knocked and hissed at random hours. Her car made a distinct clicking sound when the air conditioning kicked on. This hum was steadier than any of that. I listened again. Halfway through the message, just after she says, "If you're listening to this," there's a soft sound in the background. A single, muted click. Sharp enough to stand out once you know it's there. I froze, finger hovering over the screen. I played it again, isolating that moment. Click. Not digital, not interference. It sounded like a door latch. The kind you hear when someone tests a handle carefully, trying to see if it's locked without making noise. My throat went dry. Immediately after the sound, her breathing changes. It catches slightly, just for a fraction of a second. Not a gasp. More like she inhales, and then stops herself, holding the breath in her chest before letting it out slowly. I'd missed that before. Once I heard it, I couldn't unhear it. She wasn't alone, and she knew it. I replayed the message again, this time mapping it out in my head like a timeline. Breath, pause, voice, click, controlled inhale, final sentence. It wasn't an accident. She'd chosen those words carefully. Not, "I'm scared," and not, "I need help." Not, "Please come." A statement, a conclusion. I leaned back in my chair, staring at the ceiling, my thoughts racing now. If she'd recorded this somewhere specific, somewhere identifiable, then the voicemail wasn't just a message. It was a marker. I closed my eyes and listened again, imagining the space around her, the way sound behaved, the lack of echo, the muted quality of her voice, like the room absorbed noise instead of reflecting it. Small room, enclosed, not much empty space. A memory surfaced then, unprompted. A place she'd mentioned once, months before she died. Casually, in passing. Somewhere she went regularly, but never talked much about. I'd thought nothing of it at the time. Now, the memory tightened into something sharper. I opened my eyes and sat forward, pulling up a note on my phone. I wrote the name down before I could second-guess myself. The hum, the latch, the way she'd held her breath. It fit. I didn't want it to. I listened to the voicemail one last time, not to analyze it, but to hear her voice without dissecting it. For a moment, it almost felt like a normal call again, like I could answer it if I tried hard enough. When it ended, I didn't replay it. I took the headphones off and set them carefully on the table, my hands steady despite the knot forming in my stomach. I knew where she'd been when she recorded it, and if I was right, then the voicemail wasn't just something that had reached me by mistake. She'd left it for me to find. I stood up and grabbed my keys. I didn't tell myself I was going to confirm anything. I didn't frame it as an investigation or a search for answers. That would have implied a choice. This felt more like following instructions I hadn't realized I'd been given. Whatever had happened to her hadn't ended with her death. And the place where she'd recorded that message was still there, waiting. The place didn't look like anything when I arrived. That was the first thing that unsettled me. It wasn't hidden. It wasn't fenced off or marked by warning signs. It sat exactly where it always had, open, well lit, and surrounded by the quiet movement of people going about their evenings without paying it any special attention. I parked across the street and stayed in the car longer than necessary, watching. Nothing happened. People came and went at a normal pace. A couple laughed as they passed by. Someone pushed through the entrance with their phone pressed to their ear, already distracted by whatever waited on the other end of the call. If I hadn't known what I was listening for, I would have driven right past it. I got out of the car and crossed the street, the voicemail playing silently in my head as I walked. Each step felt deliberate, like I was moving through a checklist rather than toward a destination. Inside, the air was cool and evenly circulated. That was when my stomach tightened. The hum was there, soft, constant, exactly the same as the one beneath my sister's voice. I stopped just inside the entrance and stood still, listening. The sound blended into the background noise of the building so seamlessly that no one else seemed to notice it. To them, it was just part of the place, air conditioning doing its job. To me, it was confirmation. I took my phone out and put the headphones back in. I didn't press play right away. I waited until I was sure I was standing in the same kind of space she'd been in, away from open doors, away from foot traffic, in a section where sound didn't travel far, a place where you could speak quietly and not be overheard. When I finally played the voicemail, the effect was immediate. The hum beneath her voice matched the one around me perfectly. Same pitch, same rhythm, same faint vibration you could feel more than hear if you stood still long enough. I swallowed and kept listening. When the soft click came, I flinched. Because I heard it twice, once in my headphones, and once behind me. Someone testing a door handle a few feet away. I turned instinctively, my heart pounding, but it was nothing. Just a maintenance worker checking a utility room before moving on. He didn't look at me. He didn't slow down. The sound lingered anyway, overlapping with the recording in my ears until I couldn't separate them. I stayed where I was and listened to the message all the way through. Her breathing changed in the same places. The acoustics matched exactly. Her voice sat in the air the same way mine did when I spoke quietly under my breath to test it. "This wasn't an accident," she said again. Standing there, surrounded by people who had no idea what they were sharing the space with, I finally understood what she'd done. She hadn't been trying to save herself. If she had, she would have called the police, or shouted, or sent messages that demanded immediate attention. She would have left a trail that couldn't be ignored. Instead, she'd recorded something careful, controlled, something that could survive even if everything else didn't. She'd chosen her words to avoid detection. She'd picked a place where her voice would sound normal, where background noise wouldn't raise suspicion. She'd kept the message short so it wouldn't draw attention if someone saw her phone. And she hadn't sent it right away. The delay made sense now. She'd known someone was watching her digital life, monitoring what she said, where she went, who she contacted. A message sent immediately would have been deleted just like everything else, so she'd hidden it, set it aside, left it somewhere it could surface later, when whoever was paying attention had stopped looking. For me, the realization settled over me slowly, heavy and unavoidable. She'd known she wasn't protected. Whatever had happened to her hadn't been sudden. It hadn't been a moment of bad luck or a single wrong step. It had been something she saw coming far enough in advance to prepare for. not to escape, to leave proof. I stood there for several minutes after the voicemail ended, my phone still pressed to my ear, my eyes unfocused. Around me, the place continued to function as it always had. People moved through it without hesitation. Conversations overlapped and dissolved. Nothing here acknowledged what had been recorded in this space. I turned the phone off and put it back in my pocket. There was nothing I could do with what I now knew. I had no witnesses, no physical evidence, no way to prove that the message hadn't been fabricated or misinterpreted or manipulated by grief and coincidence. If I went to the police, they would listen politely and write notes, and then they would explain why none of it was enough. My sister had understood that. That was the worst part. She hadn't left the voicemail because she believed it would change anything. She'd left it because she needed someone else to carry the truth, once she couldn't. I walked back outside and stood on the sidewalk, letting the evening air wash over me. The place behind me looked exactly the same as it had when I arrived. Normal. Harmless. I realized then that I would never get answers in the way I'd once imagined. There would be no confrontation, no revelation that forced the world to correct itself. There was only this, knowledge without power. The certainty that she'd tried to tell me, and the understanding that knowing the truth didn't mean being able to do anything with it. I didn't check the voicemail again that night. Not because I was afraid it would be gone, but because some part of me already knew how this would end. Knowledge had settled into a shape I recognized. Heavy, inert, resistant to action. I drove home without turning on the radio. The apartment felt smaller when I stepped inside, like the walls had shifted inward while I was gone. I set my keys down in the same place as always, kicked off my shoes, and stood there for a moment, listening to the quiet. Nothing followed me in. I took my phone out of my pocket and unlocked it. The voicemail notification was gone. That didn't surprise me. Notifications disappear once you've listened to them. I opened the voicemail app directly, scrolling to the top of the list. Her name wasn't there. I frowned and scrolled again, slower this time, reading every entry. Old spam calls, messages from work. Nothing else. The message was gone. My heartbeat stayed steady. That scared me more than panic would have. I searched the app's settings, looking for archived messages, deleted folders, anything that suggested the voicemail had been moved instead of erased. There was nothing. I checked the phone's storage next, digging through hidden directories and cached files. The app registered that a voicemail had existed. There was a timestamp, a corrupted entry with no size listed. But the audio file itself was missing. When I tried to access it, the app froze. Then it crashed. I restarted the phone and tried again. The entry was gone entirely. No backup restored it. No cloud sync brought it back. The phone behaved as if the message had never existed in the first place. I sat down on the edge of the couch and stared at the screen. This was the part where I should have called someone, told a friend, told my parents, gone to the police anyway, even knowing how it would end. I didn't. I played the conversations out in my head instead. I received a voicemail from my sister months after she died. It said it wasn't an accident. I can't show it to you. Every version ended the same way, with polite concern, careful nods, and explanations about grief, about how the mind looks for meaning after loss, about how technology can glitch in strange ways. They wouldn't be wrong. Without proof, there was no difference between the truth and a story I couldn't let go of. I opened my laptop and searched again through everything I'd already checked. Messages, backups, emails. Nothing new appeared. Nothing reassembled itself into something coherent. Whatever trail she'd left behind had been temporary by design. It had lasted just long enough to reach me. That realization hollowed me out in a way grief never had. She hadn't expected justice. She hadn't expected rescue. She'd known the truth wouldn't survive long in the open. So she'd given it to one person. I closed the laptop and leaned back, staring at the ceiling as the last of the evening light faded from the room. The hum of the refrigerator returned, steady and unremarkable. Life, continuing. I wondered how many other truths existed like this. Brief, fragile things that passed from one person to another before disappearing completely. How many stories ended without records or consequences, carried only by someone who couldn't afford to forget them? I knew I would carry this one for the rest of my life, not as a mystery to be solved, but as a certainty that would never be acknowledged. There would be no follow-up call, no delayed explanation, no moment where the pieces snapped into place and demanded action. The world would remain exactly as it was. I picked up my phone one last time and stared at the empty voicemail list. Then I locked the screen and set it face down on the table. Somewhere, the truth had existed. Briefly, clearly, and now it was gone, except for the space it had left behind. I turned off the light and sat in the dark, listening to the quiet apartment breathe around me, knowing that what I carried couldn't change anything. It could only remain, silent and entirely without consequence.